Have you ever looked at the news and just wondered why the world feels like it's constantly teetering on the edge of total chaos?
Oh, absolutely. I think everyone has that moment of panic.
Right, and you have to wonder if the so-called experts who are trying to predict global politics actually have any idea what they are doing.
Well, that is a very valid question.
Because, I mean, think about this. In 1999, international prosecutors uncovered a plot that was it was almost too horrifying to even comprehend. They literally called it 48 Hours of Terror in the Sky.
Yeah, the Ramsey Youssef plot, just chillin'.
Exactly. So this guy, Ramzi Youssef, orchestrates this massive conspiracy to detonate explosives on, I think it was a dozen commercial U.S. airliners simultaneously, right over the Pacific Ocean.
Which is just a staggering level of coordination.
It is. But here's the thing that really, sent shockwaves through the whole academic world. This wasn't some act of war declared by a rival nation.
Right.
It was literally designed by a handful of guys working out of a tiny apartment in Manila.
Just a few individuals.
Yeah. So if you were a political scientist at that time and your entire career, your entire worldview was built on this fundamental idea that only nations have the power to cause that kind of global destruction,
Yeah.
well, what do you do when your whole theoretical framework just shatters overnight?
I mean, it forces a complete and total reckoning in the field.
Which is exactly the mission of this deep dive into the source material.
Yeah, it's a big one today.
We are going to explore how we actually, make sense of all that global chaos. We're unpacking the tools that scholars use to predict the behavior of nations and the sometimes really dangerous ways they misuse history to do it.
Which happens a lot more than you'd think.
Oh, I believe it. And we're going to see how these grand theories hold up against terrifying real-world crises. And the stack of materials we have for this is just fascinating.
It's a great mix of sources.
We've got foundational textbooks on international relations, or IR as we'll call it.
Right, the basics.
Plus, this really brilliant critical text by a USF human rights expert named Thomas W. Smith. It's called History and International Relations, and it's all about how political scientists basically abuse history.
That one is a heavy hitter.
It really is. And then, to test all of this against reality, we're pulling from a deeply specialized 1999 book on aviation terrorism and security.
So the starting line for all of this, before we get into the theories, is understanding the core dilemma that all these scholars are actually trying to solve.
Okay, lay it on me.
Well, think about it like this. If you are wronged in your hometown, someone steals your car, what do?
I call the police.
Exactly. You call the cops. You have a domestic legal system to fall back on. But in international relations, there is no overarching authority.
Right.
There is literally no 9/11 for planet Earth.
That is a terrifying way to put it, but it's true.
Right. If a country decides to just cross a border and invade its neighbor, there is no global police force that's going to automatically show up and slap handcuffs on a dictator.
Which creates this massive headache that our sources refer to as the collective goods problem. Or I think it's also called the tragedy of the commons, right?
Yes, exactly. The free rider problem.
Because if a good is collective, like, say, a stable global economy or a clean atmosphere or even just safe international shipping lanes, everyone on Earth benefits from it.
Regardless of whether they actually chipped in to maintain it.
Right. So how do you get countries to actually cooperate?
Well, that dilemma is all about human motivation. How do you get a sovereign country to pay its fair share when the logical, selfish thing to do is just sit back and let every other nation do all the heavy lifting?
Yeah. Why pay for the cow when you get the milk for free?
Exactly. So historically, political scientists outline three main mechanisms to solve this. The first one is dominance.
Okay, so that's basically the play by my rules or else approach.
Essentially, yes. It's when a hegemon, like a massive superpower, forces compliance. They act as the de facto global police, using their overwhelming military or economic might to just establish order.
So, kind of like the United States policing international waters to make sure global trade routes stay open.
That is a perfect example.
Okay.
Now, the second mechanism is reciprocity. This is a tit-for-tat system. It's all based on leverage.
Meaning like you scratch my back, I scratch yours, or I guess you punch me, I punch you.
Precisely, and we see that constantly. If a country artificially lowers the price of its exports to, hurt American manufacturing, what does the U.S. do?
They slap a massive tariff on those goods.
Right. They use economic levers to punish bad behavior and trade agreements to reward good behavior.
Makes sense.
Then you have the third solution, which is identity.
Identity,
Yeah.
yeah.
This happens when actors actually change their behavior based on a shared sense of belonging to a community.
So they prioritize the group over their own selfish interests.
Yes.
Kind of like the European Union. Like countries literally giving up their own unique currencies to adopt the euro just because they identify with that broader European project.
Which is a huge sacrifice, but they do it for the shared identity. And this brings us to the great divide in how scholars interpret all these solutions.
First great debate.
Exactly. When academics tried to build a science around predicting how countries would use dominance, reciprocity, or identity, it sparked this massive clash.
And looking at our sources, this debate is essentially a huge fight between idealism and realism.
The two heavyweights.
Yeah. It seems like idealism really took hold right after the absolute devastation of World War I. You had Woodrow Wilson, the creation of the League of Nations.
Right, trying to make sure that never happened again.
Exactly. Driven by this profound, almost desperate belief that human reason and morality and strong international institutions could literally just eliminate war entirely.
Because the idealists looked at the carnage of the trenches in World War I, and they concluded that the old way of doing things, secret alliances, arms races, it was just broken.
It was a disaster.
So they believed that if you just built the right legal frameworks, if you established very clear international laws, nations would naturally cooperate. Because peace is ultimately in everyone's best interest.
But then, World War II happened.
Yes. Yes, it did.
Which is a pretty glaring piece of evidence that the League of Nations and that whole idealist framework completely failed to stop a global catastrophe.
It was a total failure of the system. And out of the ashes of that specific failure emerged realism. Thinkers like Hans Morgenthau looked at the Second World War, and they completely rejected that idealist view. They said it was dangerously naive.
Dangerous because it gives you a false sense of security.
Exactly. Realists argue that the international system is purely anarchic. There are no rules. Furthermore, they believe human nature is inherently self-interested.
Everyone is just out for themselves.
Right. Therefore, states have to prioritize power and their own survival above everything else. Morality doesn't keep you safe. Tanks and aircraft carriers keep you safe.
Okay, wait. I'm trying to picture this on a more relatable scale for you listening. Is this kind of like, okay, imagine you are moving into a house with a bunch of random roommates.
Okay, I like this.
Idealism is like printing out this beautifully color-coded chore chart, pinning it to the fridge, and just assuming basic human decency will keep the kitchen clean.
A very optimistic view.
Right. But realism is buying a heavy-duty floor safe for your bedroom and locking all your groceries inside it, because you just assume everyone in the house is ultimately a thief out for themselves.
That analogy cuts right to the core of the debate. It really does. And to carry that analogy forward, realists heavily criticize the idealists because, well, relying on that chore chart almost got the entire house burned down in World War II.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Morgenthau and the realists insisted that the struggle for power isn't just some temporary glitch in the system. It is a permanent condition of human existence.
It's just baked into who we are.
Exactly. They say it can be managed maybe by balancing power so no single roommate gets too strong, but it can never be truly eliminated.
So if you have these two massive camps,
Right.
the idealists with their chore charts and the realists with their floor safes.
Right.
And they are both fiercely, absolutely convinced that their worldview is the only correct one. How do they actually prove it? Because, I mean, they can't just run a science experiment with real countries.
No, they can't. So they turn to history. History basically becomes the laboratory of international relations.
But this is exactly where the science of global politics gets incredibly messy. And frankly, looking at the sources, quite dangerous.
Very dangerous.
Which brings us to Thomas W. Smith. So he wrote this highly critical book, History and International Relations. And he basically issues this massive warning to the whole field, saying that IR scholars constantly and sometimes recklessly abuse history.
They really do.
They treat the past like it's just this objective database where they could just run a quick keyword search to find facts that prove their theories.
And Smith meticulously breaks down how this abuse actually happens. He categorizes it into specific fallacies.
Let's go through them because they are wild.
So the most prominent one is selection bias or anecdotalism.
Okay.
This is when a theorist will highlight, say, 3 specific historical wars that perfectly align with their realist worldview, while conveniently ignoring the 20 historical peace treaties that totally contradict it.
Which is just terrible science. I mean, if
Well,
you're only actively looking for evidence that proves you right, you are guaranteed to find it.
exactly. And the consequence of that is you end up with foreign policies built on total illusions.
Yikes. Okay, what's next?
Then you have the fallacy of ahistoricism.
Ahistoricism.
Yeah, this is stripping historical events of all their actual nuance and context. So a scholar might look at a territorial dispute in, say, the 16th century involving feudal lords and shifting borders
Right.
and analyze it using the exact same framework they'd apply to a 20th century conflict between modern nation states with strict passports and standing armies.
That makes no sense.
It's
It's like trying to understand the politics of the Roman Empire by analyzing how Julius Caesar would have used modern social media.
That is exactly what it's like. It just doesn't fit the reality of the people living at that time. You can't read the present into the past.
Okay, so that's ahistoricism. What was the one about filters?
Right, what Smith calls theoretical filtering.
Got it.
This is when a scholar views history purely through their own predetermined lens.
Like wearing tinted glasses.
Exactly. If a diehard realist examines a country sending massive amounts of humanitarian aid to a poorer nation, their filter won't allow them to see genuine charity.
Because they don't believe in charity on a global scale.
Right. They will automatically interpret it as a covert strategy to buy influence and expand power. It makes the research entirely tautological.
Wait, tautological meaning circular.
Yes. The theory proves the history, and the history proves the theory.
It's just a closed loop. No new information can get in.
Exactly.
Okay, and there was one more fallacy he mentioned. Something about clay.
Ah, yes. Cathedrals of clay.
That's a great phrase.
It is. This is Smith's critique of highly quantitative researchers. In an effort to make IR a hard science, like physics or chemistry, scholars build these massively complex, mathematically precise statistical models.
Okay, sounds good in theory.
Right. But they are feeding historical data into these models, data that is often soft, ambiguous, or just completely incomplete.
Oh, I see. I actually highlighted a quote from the text on this that perfectly captures the problem. Let me find it here. Smith quotes the historian Peter Novick, who said that getting history right is like nailing jelly to the wall.
Nailing jelly to the wall.
Yeah. So if history is just jelly, if it's constantly shifting and always debated by the people who lived it, aren't these political scientists acting a lot more like trial lawyers writing a brief to win a case rather than actual scientists finding objective truth?
Smith would wholeheartedly endorse your trial lawyer analogy. History is definitely not some static database sitting on a server somewhere. It is constantly being rewritten and weaponized.
Weaponize how?
Well, Smith points to dictators inventing what he calls ethnohistory.
Ethnohistory.
Yeah, it's a deliberate blend of myth and fact used to control a population's identity and justify aggression. Like, we used to own that land 1,000 years ago, so we have the right to invade it today.
Oh, wow. That happens all the time.
It really does.
Yeah.
But even in democratic societies, history is debated. Look at the massive cultural controversy over how the Smithsonian displayed the Enola Gay exhibit back in the 1990s.
Right, the plane that dropped the atomic bomb.
Yes. Even when every single historian agrees on the raw, physical facts of what happened, they can still passionately disagree on the moral weight and the political meaning of those facts.
So, using this constantly shifting jelly as the foundational bedrock for your grand, sweeping theory of how the entire world works, it seems profoundly risky.
It is incredibly risky. History is just far too complex, bloody, and contradictory to be crammed into a neat little theoretical box.
So, obviously, the discipline of international relations realizes it has a massive problem here. Classical realism is a bit too rigid, saying everything just boils down to selfish human nature, and the historical evidence they are relying on is being manipulated.
Right.
So, to survive, the field had to evolve. It couldn't just obsess over human nature anymore. It had to start looking at the invisible structures governing the world.
And that realization led to neorealism, which was championed by Kenneth Waltz in the late 1970s.
How is neorealism different?
Waltz argued that it's not actually human nature that causes conflict, it is the anarchic structure of the international system itself.
Oh, interesting.
His point was that even if you take perfectly good, highly moral people and put them in a system with no overarching police force, they will eventually have to arm themselves out of sheer fear of the unknown.
Because you just don't know what the other guy is going to do.
Exactly. It's the structure, not the people. And around the same time, neoliberalism emerged, pushed by scholars like Robert Kiyosaki.
And what was their angle?
They focused on how complex economic interdependence think, global supply chains, and transnational institutions could act as a buffer against that anarchy. If our economies are tied together, we are less likely to shoot at each other.
But looking at the modern world, even those structural theories weren't enough, right? Because the world just kept rapidly changing.
Yes, very rapidly.
We started seeing the rise of what our sources call the new international relations, which moves completely beyond the traditional idea that the nation-state is the only actor that matters.
This is a huge turning point.
Yeah, it starts looking at non-state actors, like massive multinational corporations that have way more wealth than some actual countries, or global NGOs. And this is where the text introduces critical theories.
Right. These critical theories offer entirely different lenses for analyzing global power dynamics.
And it's really fascinating looking at the tools these scholars use, whether it's Marxism, feminism, or green theory. And just to be completely clear for you listening, these aren't political endorsements in our sources.
No, not at all.
They are just different analytical lenses academics use to diagnose the exact same global crisis. We're just neutrally reporting on how they function in the field.
That distinction is vital. Let's take a modern trade war as an example of how these lenses actually work in practice.
Okay, let's hear it.
So, a traditional realist looks at a trade war and analyzes it purely as a struggle for national dominance, like how tariffs affect a country's ability to fund its military.
Makes sense.
But a scholar using a Marxist lens looks at that exact same trade war, but focuses on class struggle. They analyze which corporate elites are getting rich off the tariffs, while the working class pays higher prices for everyday goods.
Same event, totally different focus.
Exactly. Then a feminist theorist might analyze how those shifting economic policies disproportionately impact women in developing nations who, say, work in manufacturing.
Right.
And a green theorist would look at how the trade war forces countries to deregulate environmental protections just so they can stay competitive.
It totally changes the proposed solution depending on which glasses you're wearing.
Absolutely.
But the theory that really stood out in our sources as a massive paradigm shift was constructivism. This was championed by Alexander Wendt. And he famously wrote that anarchy is what states make of it.
This is a radical departure from the realist assumption.
Because realism says anarchy automatically means violence.
Right. Realism assumes a world without a police force guarantees a brutal, violent struggle for survival. But constructivists argue that our international reality is not some fixed law of physics. It is socially constructed by shared ideas, beliefs, and historical norms.
Okay, wait, I'm trying to wrap my head around this one. Is this kind of like how paper money works?
Oh, I like where this is going.
Okay, so a $100 bill is literally just a tiny piece of paper with some ink on it. It has zero inherent physical value. You can't eat it, it won't keep you warm.
True.
But it has immense world-shaping power solely because we all collectively, culturally agree that it does. So what Wendt is saying is that anarchy is only a dog-eat-dog world if we all culturally agree to act like dogs.
That is a phenomenal way to understand it. The physical reality is shaped entirely by the social reality.
Wow.
Think about it. If states collectively, culturally agree over time that a nation's borders are sacred, or that using chemical weapons is a horrific taboo, those shared ideas actually constrain a nation's behavior just as effectively as a standing army would.
Because the reputational cost of breaking the taboo is just too high. You become a total pariah.
Precisely. This is why studying shared global norms, or regional organizations like the African Union, or the rising influence of the Global South, is becoming just as critical to understanding global politics as counting the number of nuclear submarines a superpower has.
Which is a huge shift in how we view power. But here's where it gets incredibly urgent.
Yes.
This evolution in theory isn't just academic navel-gazing for professors in tweed jackets. The way we map global threats dictates how we actually survive them.
It's life or death.
And when we look at non-traditional security threats, the old theories start to aggressively crack under the pressure.
They absolutely do, because when you face a threat that doesn't wear a national uniform, doesn't represent a state, and frankly doesn't care about borders, traditional realism struggles to provide a coherent answer.
And this brings us back to where we started. To see this in action, we look at Paul Wilkinson and Brian Jenkins's 1999 book, Aviation Terrorism and Security.
A very sobering read.
Extremely. They detail a terrifying shift in the landscape of global threats. They analyzed the Lockerbie bombing, where a bomb on Pan Am Flight 103 killed 270 people.
Just devastating.
They detail Ramzi Yousef's horrific 48 hours of terror in the sky plot that we mentioned earlier. They cover the rise of man-portable surface-to-air missiles, or SAMs, being fired at civilian aircraft, and the tragic crash of a hijacked Ethiopian airliner off the Comoro Islands that killed 127 people.
And connecting this back to our IR theories, this poses a massive existential problem for traditionalists. Because remember, traditional realism insists that the state is the primary, almost exclusive actor that matters in world politics.
Okay, I have to push back on that, though.
Go.
If I am a classical realist in 1999, studying the Ramzi Yousef plot, doesn't my entire worldview just break? I mean,
Yeah.
how can you look me in the eye and say states are the only actors that matter when a handful of guys working out of an apartment can plot to blow up a dozen commercial planes across the globe?
Well, a classical realist would mount a defense here.
What could they possibly say?
They would argue that guys like Ramzi Yousef don't exist in a total vacuum. They still need state-issued passports to travel. They often rely on state banking systems to move their money around.
Okay, sure.
And most importantly, they usually require safe harbor in rogue states, like, say, Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, to train and operate. So the realists would argue you still need to focus all your energy on the states harboring them.
Okay, I see that. I see the logic. But the actual actor initiating the violence, the person deciding to bring down the plane, isn't a government.
Right.
They don't have a capital city you can bomb in retaliation or a formal economy you can sanction.
And that is exactly where the realist defense hits a brick wall.
It just doesn't work.
You are right. The traditional framework does aggressively crack here. It simply has no model for dealing with a non-state actor wielding the kind of destructive power that was historically reserved for entire nations.
And this extends so far beyond just aviation terrorism in 1989. I mean, if you look at the news today, the biggest threats are almost all transnational.
Absolutely.
You have cyber warfare campaigns launched by anonymous, decentralized hacker collectives.
Yeah.
You have the rapid, borderless spread of global health pandemics. You have the cascading devastation of climate change.
None of which care about borders.
Exactly. None of these fit neatly into the realist model of state-on-state military power struggles. You can't shoot a missile at a pandemic.
Which means that to survive these modern horrors, we actually require the very things that the old-school realists completely dismissed as utopian fantasies.
Like the tour charts.
Yes. We desperately need the global cooperation and institutions championed by idealism and neoliberalism to coordinate international security, to share intelligence, to track illicit financial networks.
And we need the shared norms and shifting identities championed by constructivism to unite a global community against these transnational threats.
Exactly. We need all the tools in the toolbox.
So we have covered a massive amount of ground today. We started with the sheer terror of the collective goods problem, basically, trying to keep the peace with no world police.
A tough job.
We waded through the great debates, pitting the chore charts of idealism against the floor space of realism. We explored Thomas W. Smith's warnings about treating history like jelly and falling into the traps of selection bias and theoretical filtering.
Yes.
And finally, we saw exactly why these theories had to evolve into constructivism and the new IR to face modern borderless horrors like aviation terrorism.
It's a lot to process. And, while all of this might sound like high-level academia, we really want to remind you that IR directly dictates your daily reality.
It really does.
It is the reason you have to take your shoes off and walk through scanners at airport security. It dictates the price you pay for oil at the gas pump, the cost of the smartphone in your pocket, and even the environmental regulations governing the air in your city.
Whether you realize it or not, you are an active participant in this international system.
We all are.
Which leaves us with one final, slightly unnerving thought for you to mull over. We talked heavily about constructivism today, the idea that our international reality is socially constructed by the histories we choose to tell and the facts we choose to remember.
Right, the jelly on the wall.
Exactly. But what happens to global politics and human identity itself in the very near future? Because we are entering an era where artificial intelligence and opaque algorithms are increasingly generating our news, summarizing our past, and literally writing our historical narratives for us.
Oh, wow.
If history is jelly, who or what will be controlling the jelly?
That is a question that could easily redefine the entire next century of international relation.
It certainly is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope it helped you make a little more sense of the chaos. Until next time, keep questioning the narrative.